is Alex, and it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Animal Liberation New South Wales. What I'll be speaking about today often seems like one of the most basic and uncomplicated things that we use almost every day: language. It's something that we claim as purely human, unique in us amongst an entire planet of other species. But it's really not as simple or innocent as we think. And if you're anything like me, you probably use language to find your way here today. Because without it, and without the words and the symbols we use to signify it, I really think that I'd be driving around in circles. So I made it, and I'd really like to thank you all for being here. But before we begin, I'd like to have a look at something together. Right now, in Australia, if you were to come across this puppy, covered in mud and tangled in bits of plastic, you would probably do the right thing. But right now, in Australia, if you did the right thing, you would be committing a crime. You could face thousands of dollars in fines. Why? This isn't a puppy, this is a fox. And to transport a fox, even a fox that has been injured and needs veterinary care, or to care for a fox as a companion, like a cat or a dog, is a criminal act in New South Wales, my home state. And how can this be? How can there be such transparently heinous and contradictory laws, punishing people for what we would all do for a puppy? It's really rather easy. Call them pests, call them vermin, call them feral. Say those words and you're giving a green light to cruelty and standing by in the face of suffering. So when I posted this on Facebook a few weeks ago, I was hoping to help shine a light on what really goes on when we give others a label as deadly and dangerous as pest. The fact that a pest control order, or PCO, has effectively sentenced animals like this to death isn't something to be proud of. It should be something to be ashamed of. And this isn't only theoretical. Only last week, this fox, Jorah, was killed. His family had rescued him after the PCO, meaning he didn't have a permit, so he wasn't defined as companion, even though he lived and was loved like one, but as pest. And this is something a lot of people didn't and still don't know about. And I think there are a few reasons for this. One is the language that we use. By using words and labels like pest and vermin, and then terms like control, euthanasia, the inevitable outcome is concealed, it's obscure. And another is the fact that those in positions of power or authority relative to our own promote a violent dichotomy between other animals and ourselves. So this is a screenshot of a Facebook post by the Shooters and Fishers member, Robert Borsak. In the video Mr. Borsak published, he explains that he personally killed the fox behind him and placed the native bird in the mouth. And that's a motive that runs through so many of the images and ideas surrounding the demonization of so-called pest species. Because the target species is portrayed as a ruthless, murderous demon preying upon our animals or our livelihoods. So we read things like, foxes are not native. It's fine, they're not. But we could quite easily counter that neither are the cows in intensive dairy farms, or the bodies that we call broiler that are killed in the hundreds of millions every year. True. But that's not enough. And it presents us with a fairly unambiguous argument. They kill our animals, whether they be native or commodified property. They don't belong. Ownership and the property systems that all animals inhabit are the basis for this. The 1.6 million cows in Australian dairy farms and the 12 million hens kept imprisoned and exploited are exempt from this system for one reason. They provide us with utility, a value that something we value. And the language we use allows thought makers like Mr. Borsak to capitalize on common and taken for granted assumptions that others duly spread. pests, not pets. One is abhorred, the other is adored. And I should be clear, this doesn't apply solely to foxes. There is no middle ground. They are either here for us to use or enjoy, and are valued on the basis of this, or they are demonized and drafted for destruction. They must be managed, controlled, culled, harvested. Remember these words and take them away. They are all euphemisms for one or two things: cruelty, slaughter. And in a sense, this is one thing that I would really love for you to take away. Call BS when you see it, and don't be shy about it. Because each and every fox that is in this country was brought here by Europeans, wanting a familiar creature to recreationally kill. They were brought here by people. So we're threatened by those that pose damage to us. And this is as true financially as it is physically. And animals labelled pest are placed firmly in a category below even the defamed and devastated so-called farm animal on which they prey, and who we protect from anything and anyone but ourselves. So we're left with this: animals we don't own don't belong, and those we don't exploit have no value or utility. And those that have no value or utility are threats to cull, control, harvest. And that is the basis of the pest epithet. Because at least since Descartes, we've been busy creating and cementing cognitive categories that separate us from them. But as good as we are at divorcing ourselves from other animals, the arrow doesn't go both ways. When we claim as a resource an entire gamut of species, and disregard or literally destroy others due only to the body they were born into, the category erases any and all individuality. And that's not a new thing. We do it to invented subcategories of humans, and we even use it as an excuse or an enthusiast to wage war. There are no individuals, there is only a mass. By repetition and relentless reinforcement, we become so accustomed to an idea, a practice, or a prejudice that it exists as a thread from our ears, our eyes, and our minds to the punctures, poisons, and traps that only and always end in death. A good fox is a dead fox. I grew up with that phrase, and I didn't for 1 second ever really consider what it meant. I may be an anomaly, I don't believe it, but the mentality and ideology behind it is practical and active. The individual has disappeared. Because only we can exploit, only we can invade, only we can kill. And when the first word says we, as a total species like any other, did wrong, when we retrace our steps and find ourselves against the wall, we make it disappear. It never happened because we act like it didn't happen. It doesn't matter because we tell ourselves they deserve it. And we say it with words. It reminds me of something that I read and then watched not long ago. Throughout the book and then the film, there are quotes like this: they are evil, evil, dangerous vermin. They're not really people at all. Dad's not horrible, is he? He's a good man. Of course he is, but he's in charge of a horrible place. It's only horrible for them. I'll show you what happens to rats who steal. Now there's a theme there. We can see it, and we can probably sense it when we hear it. For now, let's focus on this one. I'll show you what happens to rats who steal. And when I was preparing for today, I wrote a draft on Microsoft Word. And I noticed something here. Something was wrong with what I wrote. So I turned to Google. I typed green squiggly line Microsoft Word, hit search, and was told that it was a grammatical error. The sentence didn't make grammatical sense. Word said if I chose that instead of who, I'd be making sense again. But what if I wrote the same sentence but changed rats to humans? Word said, okay, that makes sense. So what does that tell us? It tells us that aside from the comparatively more obvious examples, equating what is animal with what is inferior, this can be done at a level that removes their very being. That refers to things or objects. A human isn't a that. A human is a who. And because a human is a who, animals have to be that, below us. Below us in thought, below us in language, and below us in action. And all of this in a work of fiction about the horrors of World War II. It says something about the embeddedness of an idea, when something is considered so important that it is included in the things that we make up, in our own imaginations. Now this is the power of language, the force of words, and what I'll be speaking about today. Language and the ability to communicate in complex ways is one of our most powerful tools. Words support, maintain, and sustain culturally sanctioned control over and abuse of other non-human animals. And with selective and deceptive use, it becomes a weapon. Along the way, I'll refer to tiers or categories of animals based upon how humans value them for their utility to us. I call these the companion, commodity, and uncaged. Because animals have always been there. They were there when we foraged, and they were there when we built our first fences to keep some out and others in. Dogs have been beside us for a long, long time. A lot of us happily call them friends or family members. They sit on the first tier of the utility protection continuum. They have limited protection, but are considered sentient, valuable in and of themselves, and share a common home with many of us. We give them names, we remember their birthdays, even if we have to make them up. So when acts violate our belief of what can reasonably be done to companions, there is outrage and vocal demands for justice. Some may remember the Wagga Council case from earlier in the year. Animals were left to die in freezers, in facilities we pay for. Even here, the impact upon people made the headline. And when those responsible remain unpunished, we seek justice. But the further from friend we go, the more we become less guardian and more oppressive. We chose to exploit over coexist, and we did so selectively. We selected for prolonged exploitation, those that provided us with utilities that we value. And this is the second tier, the commodified life. Here, so-called farm or food animals are valued precisely and explicitly for what they are and can become, rather than who they are and can or could be. It's rare to hear of these species being doted upon like a cat or a dog. That doesn't mean it's not possible. It simply means that they are valued above all else for their flesh, fiber, or bodily fluids. And for a second, let's think about that. If you're like me, you've probably been in a situation in which you've used language like that. Flesh, fiber, bodily fluids. How many of us have been in a social situation and used language like this to describe animal agriculture? I would bet, and I would bet high, that when we do this, we are often met with disgust and probably censure. But why? Aren't we just accurately describing what is really going on? Of course we are, but collectively, as a culture, we have been so thoroughly conditioned to couch what we say about other animals and what we do to them in detached and ambiguous ways. The language permits us to consider other animals as we would a crop of wheat or corn or sugarcane. That's what the word agriculture evokes. We use the same terminology as we would were we farming beans or broccoli, when what we're really talking about is intensive and unrelenting suffering. We do this so we can remain cognitively distant from what would otherwise be a disturbing and horrific reality. And industry know this. Recently, I came across a paper published by the Poultry Science Association. They say that consumers are unlikely to want full disclosure of all aspects of animal production. And there is a real risk that certain realities of animal production would be aversive to consumers. Now, that's almost a given when their births, lives, and deaths are combined into the term production. Before I worked for Animal Liberation, I was a special education teacher's aide. And I honestly would have forgiven any of my students if they drew a picture of Old MacDonald next to the misnomer animal agriculture. But the page goes on. As consumers who know certain realities, we may consequently refuse, as is our right, to purchase particular products. In the end, it came down to dollars and longevity. The reason they're worried is because the link between revealing certain realities, and we do this with language, may mean less confidence, less support, and less money. So my translation is this. There are things that farmers do that you or I would likely find inhumane or cruel. If we know these cruelties, we might not want to support them. And we have that right as consumers, and how generous is that? But if we exercise that right too rigorously, we threaten the bottom line. Then we become extremists. Our right to refuse only exists if we take our cards off the table and back away quietly. It disappears when we try to tell others that the dealer is corrupt. Now, remember the demands for justice for the cat in the Wagga pound. That case led politicians to demand an inquiry into animal welfare violations. Compare this with a recent case in which a customer at an egg farm filmed and reported chickens being mass gassed in skip bins. A customer tipped them off. This is no extremist, as I know none of us are either. The legislation basically turned its back on the bodies in the skip bin and said nothing. This is where claims to sentience and utility become increasingly pertinent, because it is a tragic cliche that the cops would be called if we did this to dogs. But we do some disgusting things to dogs. We just don't give them collars or name them. So by placing other non-human animals on tiers of utility that decrease in value the further we depart from ourselves, we create, legitimate, and sustain exploitative and destructive systems. And we solidify this through language. When cases like the skip bin gassing are exposed, we're left to wade through terminology invented and redefined by industry itself. It even becomes our language. Euthanasia doesn't mean mercy when we apply it to animals. It has been utterly and completely torn from its roots. There are no sterile syringes, and there is no mercy. There is a bin, there is plastic, there is gas. For they are units whose individuality, sense of being, and ability to experience and suffer is erased. It's cold, calculated, and deliberately devoid of emotion. Do we get upset when a building burns to the ground and 400 units of stock are lost? Not really, because the words help us stay a safe distance from that suffering. And do we get upset when we're told that there are huge livestock losses? No, because the way that we're told precludes any emotion. But that's not entirely true either. Rather than framing the tragedy as it should be, we're exposed to language like this. The lead sentence says, the owners are reeling, because millions of dollars worth of stock has been lost. But lost from where? The faded owners may have lost capital, but the so-called stock lost their lives. And more than this, the blame is laid on some external error. Forget that the pigs are there to be fattened to be food, and forget that the hands that led them there and locked the door were human. So it's an exercise in professional and predetermined framing. If you want to dissolve or dilute responsibility, make it hard to place blame, and don't name names. That's why financial losses trump lives lost. And on the rare occasion it does reveal itself, we're left with a rather different conclusion. Here, 10,000 piglets suffered an unimaginable death. Likely, they were burnt alive in the flames or suffocated. But it's the third paragraph here that says more than most. Two locals said they simply couldn't cope with the sounds they heard coming from that factory farm. I didn't want to hear that awful sound. And who would? But who, in all their compassion and in all their courage, ever says a word for those that suffer? It may have been pitiful, but that's how you felt. By framing, and framing so selectively, their lives and even their deaths are erased. But what are those that have little that we want or can use, either in friendship, flesh, fibre, or fluids? They are condemned to the borders and boundaries. They become the great uncaged, existing outside human control and providing little utility. They sit in a precarious and vulnerable position. As we have seen, through language they are demonized, and through this they are then condemned. Because of the inadequate laws that exist for companions and commodities, the uncaged enjoy none. Whilst all states and territories have animal welfare legislation, they all fail to protect the welfare of animals labelled pests. There are even loopholes in legislation protecting people who commit acts of cruelty upon them. And even when there are clauses that seem to protect the uncaged, there are codes of practice that override them. In New South Wales, there is a defence allowing the hunting, shooting, trapping, snaring, catching, or capturing of an animal on the proviso that it inflicts no unnecessary pain. That phrase repeats like a mantra. If we tell ourselves enough, we think we might believe it, and a lot of people do. Because as all native mammals, except for the dingo, are protected in New South Wales, this ultimately means that introduced or pest species fall outside the already limited protection afforded by POCTA. So it's interesting, in some ways, that the great uncaged are afforded such narrow and limited understanding. When we hear that they're not from here, it stings of a strange kind of species of xenophobia. Any historical account could and should conclude the same of me. So when the target species is spoken of as a foreigner or an invader, take a small step back. What's really going on there? Apart from an attempt to rationalise and thereby obscure their suffering and their slaughter, they are positioned as impure. And to be impure promotes ideas connecting them to plague, labels like pest and vermin, and outcomes that can be traced from the poison bait or the bullet wound back to the beginning when they were labelled pest. If it seems convoluted, it might be because it needlessly is. It appears to make some sense, but that's because we are, over time and relentlessly, conditioned to accept a premise that is not only faulty and dishonest, but designed and drafted to divorce them of any meaningful claim to sentience. And a lot of this is rooted in language. So we all likely use language every day. It has power imbalances embedded within it. Today, there are countless animals, fated for suffering and for slaughter. Countless because there is no reliable figure or even estimate as to how many individual lives have been taken and will be taken by the ideology underpinning this pest epithet. Like Orwell, we should remember that if thought can corrupt language, language can also corrupt thought. Because language embeds power imbalances, we can and must challenge and expose its deliberate and deceptive use. Together, I truly believe that we can be a primary force for change. Each of us can be a motor, a crack in the wall that together tears the entire enterprise down. In our own lives, and especially in our daily interactions, we must use that unique ability that we claim as purely human to expose and challenge violent and speciesist linguistics. I would like to thank Lara and everyone involved in organising today. It has truly been an honour to be a part of ICAS 2016. And thank you all for coming. If I can answer any questions with Karen, I'd love to. Until all are free, we are animal liberation. Thank you very much.